What does Saul's second rash vow show us about his character? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 1 Samuel on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 36 to 46. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 1 Samuel 14, verse 36. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 1 Samuel chapter 14, beginning at verse 36. Now Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man of them." And they said, "Do whatever seems good to you." And the priest said, "Let us draw near to God here." So Saul asked counsel of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you deliver them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him that day. And Saul said, "Come over here, all you chiefs of the people, and know and see what this sin was today. For as the Lord lives, who saves Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die." But not a man among all the people answered him. Then he said to all Israel, "You be on one side, and my son Jonathan and I will be on the other side." And the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." And therefore Saul said to the Lord God of Israel, "Give a perfect lot." So Saul and Jonathan were taken, but the people escaped. And Saul said, "Cast lots between my son Jonathan and me." So Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And Jonathan told him and said, "I only tasted a little honey with the end of the rod that was in my hand. So now I must die." Saul answered, "God do so, and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan." But the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has accomplished this great deliverance in Israel? Certainly not. As the Lord lives, not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Saul and Jonathan have been fighting the Philistines. Jonathan led a sneak attack with only his armor-bearer, and since God was with him, God provided Jonathan victory. When the rest of the army, who was with Saul, saw what was going on, they joined the battle. Saul, though, made a rash vow and bound the people to it, saying that nobody was to eat anything that day until Saul received vengeance upon his enemies. This was a rather stupid vow, because the army was going into battle in mountainous terrain without the promise of a miraculous intervention by God. Forbidding them from eating would thus hurt the army. And of course, Jonathan later said that it did, for the victory was not complete when it could have been. Jonathan, though, did not hear the vow, and so when he found some honey, he ate of it. The people informed Jonathan of the vow, at which point he chastised his father before the people about the stupidity of such a vow. At nightfall, though, the people, ravenous with hunger, killed animals to eat, but in their hastiness to satiate their hunger, ate the blood with the meat, something that was forbidden in the law of Moses. Saul knew that, and so he set up a place for the blood to be drained, and had a sacrifice offered and an altar built in order to atone for the people's sins and hopefully stop God's wrath from coming upon them. All seemed to be well, but it was not. For later that night Saul told the people that they should go down and plunder the Philistines until morning light, leaving no man alive. The people initially agreed, but the priest Ahijah said that they should consult God first, for they did not do so earlier that day, and the victory was thus not complete. Saul agreed, but when the priest inquired of God, likely by Urim and Thummim, he got no answer. Saul surmised from this that there must be sin in the camp, similar to Joshua 7 when Israel lost at Ai due to the sin of Achan. In declaring that the sin must be rooted out, Saul made his second rash vow of the day, that in whoever the sin lied would surely die. Even if it was in Jonathan, he would surely die. Was that punishment demanded by God? No, for Saul didn't even know what the sin was. Was it the eating of blood? If it was, then he was just condemning his entire army. Was it in breaking Saul's vow? Then he was condemning Jonathan. Was it some sin that he had committed, perhaps wanting to plunder the Philistines by night without instruction from God? Then he was condemning himself. The law of Moses was very specific on what sins carried with it the death penalty, and was very specific the conditions under which this punishment would be carried out, on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. But without any information from God as to the actual sin, Saul's vow was stupid again, for not all sins carried with it the death penalty. Sacrifices could be offered. In vowing rashly, it shows us that Saul's character was not right with God. He was not a man after God's own heart because he acted impetuously, he acted unrighteously vengeful, and he acted cruelly. He was a despot of a king, not the sort of a king that Israel had when God ruled over them. Saul's descent away from God began when he acted rashly in offering the sacrifice at Gilgal, but instead of being more careful in the future, his actions only got worse. And as they got worse, he would drift further away from God until God finally left him altogether. This shows us the dangers of sin in leading us away from God. Not being patient to wait for Samuel seemed like a small sin, but look where it led. To threats of murder. For instead of confronting his sin and repenting, Saul simply continued on down the path. Now, to their credit, the people remained silent, for they knew that what Saul had vowed was not right. Saul was not going to be deterred, so he asked the Lord to identify the person who had trespassed that day. And the lot eventually fell upon Jonathan. Had Jonathan sinned against the Lord? No, for the Lord didn't command Saul's vow. And on top of that, not having heard the vow, Jonathan didn't even know he was breaking the command of the king. But the fact remains that he did break the command of the king, the Lord's anointed. In choosing Jonathan, though, God was not condoning the consequences set out in Saul's second rashly made vow, nor was he saying that that was the reason for his silence, even though that is what Saul concluded. God was simply identifying who broke the word of the king. Having been chosen, Jonathan confessed to what he had done and was willing to accept the punishment. And Saul was ready to mete out the punishment. But the people wouldn't let Saul do so, saying that they would not allow Saul to kill someone who, through the Lord, delivered Israel that day, simply for breaking the rashly made vow that Saul had made. In doing this, the people were saying that they were not going to stand by and be complicit to Jonathan's murder. And make no mistake, had Saul carried out his vow, it would have been murder. Jonathan, even though he had unknowingly broken the word of the king, had done nothing worthy of death. All that would have been needed to be done was a sin sacrifice to be offered, because Jonathan had done this in ignorance and was repentant. But Saul thought that he had to fulfill his vow, even if it meant that he sinned in doing so. And in that, Saul was wrong, for back in Leviticus 5, verses 4 to 6, we read, "Or if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters. And it shall be, when he is guilty in any of these matters, that he shall confess that he has sinned in that thing, and he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed, a female from the flock, a lamb or a kid of the goats as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin." In taking oaths, God never condones sin in fulfilling them. A married woman might vow that she would sell herself as a prostitute if she didn't pay back money that she owed. Such would be adultery, and is an extreme example of what is described in Leviticus 5 as thoughtlessly made oath. What was one to do in such cases? Admit their sin in making the oath, and offer the appropriate sacrifice. Saul seemingly did neither here in 1 Samuel 14, a further stain on his character that will culminate in further sin in chapter 15. But before we get there, we'll finish off chapter 14, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, I hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 1 Samuel chapter 14, verses 47 to 52, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.